This is a short video on. This video is a brief analysis on Luigi Mangione. I wrote two very small pieces that I just threw together, and then I'll have just a little discussion afterwards on idealism versus materialism, which is what the split in responses and reactions to this have been outside of the liberals. On the United Healthcare CEO shooter, Luigi Mangione. Western people being enamored by anarchism and their ideology is the reason we haven't won the right to food, housing, education, transport, and healthcare. Canada has the right to food, but there's no material basis for it. We don't have EBT cards, and although there are a huge volume of food banks, there's also a screaming demand for people to privately fund them instead of some of our oil subsidy money being used to end hunger. Western people are given tools that fail to wage class struggle and instead uphold neoliberal capitalism. In the depravity of their conditions, they cling fiercely to them. Some of the tools are used to try and make egalitarian progress, and some are used to obtain sustenance. Some examples. Obsessing about tipping instead of organizing against the material conditions that put servers in a position to endure abuse, sexual violence, and misogyny for tips, and winning material rights to defeat the conditions that servers are coerced into. Number 2, charity. Number 3, recycling. Number 4, hustling, side hustles, and working lots, both in legal and illegal ways. 5, grinding in art to focus on the individual, getting their needs met, while they are the people who need to focus on the collective and organizing the most to address the specific precarity that they are in as artists and self-employed people. Number 6, starting your own business. Number 7, focusing on boycotts. Number 8, obsessing about signal, security culture, and other individual steps to feel like you are an agent fighting the state. The parasocial relationship that people have with Luigi is born from the fantasy of making change. The fantasy of individually making a dramatic action lets people consume hate for capitalism and capitalists. The volume of right-wingers hating that CEO doesn't mean that there is unity. Their personal inconveniences do not change their desire to maintain capitalism. The liberals and right-wingers hating that CEO do not mean either are united in destroying capitalism and colonialism. This is something that people must learn. Most people that we feel are on the left are only on the left in theory. They are not in organizations. They are not working towards the end of capitalism in a meaningful, collective way. They are largely focusing on individual means. Now, this is largely the result of communist Red Scare propaganda and the US state slaughtering Marxist-Leninist revolutionaries, both in the United States and internationally. Mr. Luigi, the Italian with family in the Congress, whose family has a conservative radio show, will be a folk hero to the ignorant and the desperate. But you are forsaking that path by going through this. Glorifying this is a mistake. Idealism is blinding many right now. The people are very desperate to have hope, and they desperately want to see gains made, which is completely understandable because the people are going through such violence and everybody wants to have hope. That is a constant throughout history. But in this moment, the volume of anarchists obsessed with this is symptomatic of their fantasy of something sparking a revolution. Now, a revolution is not sparked. It is built and waged by a revolutionary vanguard who are actively committed to something greater than themselves. This can't just be done randomly or any time. This has to be done when people are thoroughly suffering and have little to nothing to lose. Even if more people went out and started shooting CEOs and even police, it would not reorganize our society. This is only done with Marxism and class struggle. If 1,000 CEOs and police were shot tomorrow, it would only heighten the contradictions. The immediate negative repercussion of vastly more than 1,000 cops being hired would drive racial violence and fascist occupation. It is the marginalized who pay the cost and bear the worst of marginalized violence, which is why the anarchist tendency is really great for men and white folks. As a tech guy making 6 figures, Luigi could have funded revolutionary orgs across many countries, but especially his own. Instead, stochastic violence. Zero commitment to building the masses and no mass work. No education, no tenant organizing, not providing revolutionary theory and aid to the masses and marginalized as we suffocate daily. Now, this is all a huge bummer, but it's good to witness this, to see it, to understand it, and to use it as a very useful example of what we can do instead. Because this has so many people caught up, but it's not pushing them in the right direction. And we only have each other. So please join me in organizing, read What Is to Be Done by Lenin, and then share your understanding of waging class struggle with others. So the left is organizations. The left is not just people on the internet who hate capitalism and shitpost, although there is a lot of shitposting organizers. Hating capitalism is a really great start, but without an organization that mobilizes, it is theoretical. It is fantasy. Now, transforming that feeling and desire to make change takes theory and then action. The lone wolf adventurism that happened isn't organizing, hence no one will be fed or housed. A very small dent in health insurance power will be here temporarily, but it isn't reorganizing society against capitalism. So there will be no significant lasting change and nothing built on this. So the struggle here is that people not in organizations need to join organizations, promote them, and fund them. Now, this is the struggle that's gone on for more than 100 years. There's so much great work being done out there, but it's not visible to most people. So most people don't have immense hope. They're not able to see in tangible ways that people are fighting the ruling class, because they have been for centuries. Whether it was anti-colonial indigenous resistance, or revolutionary black resistance, or contemporary resistance, these are all huge revolutionary efforts against the ruling class. Now, one really awful repercussion from this adventurist assassination, or whatever you want to call it, is that private security firms started being flooded with demand, which means that a lot of Nazis are going to get hired. A few reasons why Luigi Mangione has captured the hearts of Americans and why so many people think that this unites the left and right. This act of violence is the biggest individual act that somebody can aspire to. Number 2, it is the fantasy of many, many people. Number 3, the Marvel movie hero psychological conditioning that makes people fantasize a lot and gets people to focus completely on individualism. Number 4, the desire to witness a Robin Hood or heroism. Number 5, the fantasy of this level of praxis is really, really captivating. Number 6, those with chronic pain and extreme medical suffering are identifying with this story. So for them, it's really, really personal. People seeing such a really big, flashy public spectacle and it being a popular thing to talk about, that even the media is talking about it, and coworkers are talking about it, and liberals were able to talk about it, which is just a very broad thing. And the last one is the Red Scare McCarthyism making it popular to attack communists, which is the framework for anarchists being viciously defensive on this topic. To finish this is not the biggest thing radicalizing people. The Black Lives Matter uprising was the biggest civil rights movement in history of the US. Then the Second Intifada happened in Palestine. Both of these are bigger and actually conducive to fueling revolutionary developments. Luigi's praxis is simply an outlet for liberals and right-wingers to openly celebrate, while largely anarchists and others who are very desperate for hope, who are still caught up by individualism, are ensnared by this. This is like losing in gambling for 2 hours and then winning. The surge of euphoria and restoration in the same continued path is giving people faith in the wrong path. True revolutionary power comes from the masses and only the masses. No individualism, no saviors, no heroes, only the people. Now, before the Black Lives Matter uprising and the Second Intifada, there was the fight against the Dakota Access Pipeline. I think that was the biggest event in many, many years that really developed class consciousness and allowed so many people to support revolutionary efforts. So what we're seeing is a huge amount of people who are split between idealism and materialism. With materialism, we have the conception that ideas drive humanity. Ideas are responsible for the way things are. Materialism posits that the material conditions around us shape how things develop. Rev Left is one of the greatest fucking educational podcasts ever. It covers this in extreme depth, and I would highly, highly recommend it. But just as a summary, one example that they use is the American Revolution. Now, the American Revolution, Americans and people who are ignorant to the history see it as a progressive movement where they fought for freedom. They didn't fight for freedom, they fought in self-interest. They fought because they wanted more for themselves. They weren't trying to build a society for all. They weren't trying to build something that is opposite to the British Empire. They just fought in self-interest to set up their own empire. Now you can analyze it from a materialist perspective and see that it is simply the ruling class of the US who wanted to wage this revolution so that they wouldn't have to pay fucking taxes. It is completely self-interested and completely just bent on the material conditions and the interests of a ruling class, and not at all about freedom. Freedom is one of the biggest words that capitalists use to manipulate people. This happens with gusanos, this happens with so many groups of people. I have to finish this because I have to go, but there is one really useful example in seeing a Marxist debunking of the term, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. That is undialectical nonsense. It is extremely risky for a lot of reasons, and this is why. If you take the indigenous history of the US, you see the Americans waging their revolution against the British. The Americans were not set on liberating the indigenous people of the land that they were occupying. Their goal was to occupy it themselves and to set up a society for themselves. And they did. So if you feel that the enemy of your enemy is your friend, it's going to lead to a great deal of betrayal. And there's many examples throughout history. But it's just very useful to see. And that's such a good reason why history is important to see, because all the stuff that's out there, and there's so many parallels, because ruling classes continue to do the same bullshit because they're still hell-bent on exploitation. Another example of idealism is the concept that Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. It posits this idea that one person was able to make something huge, tremendously huge happen and erase the countless efforts of thousands of people. Whereas the materialist analysis of it carefully examines the material conditions surrounding slavery in the US and all the historical precedents of inequality, and then afterwards how that inequality was able to transform. Because with the outlawing of slavery, that relationship of inequality had to find another way to maintain itself. And that is part of the dialectical process and materialist analysis. Nothing just vanishes or appears overnight. It is materially grounded in history and the ongoing conditions. Which with idealism, it's easy to think that, oh, this happened and then Abraham Lincoln ended it and then things were good. Which is not the case at all. Because you see the ongoing inequality has shaped itself into different ways and loopholes that slavery could continue. So idealism is an incredibly tempting way to perceive history, perceive the way things are going on, and it takes a really in-depth and nuanced analysis to really have a firm grasp and not be manipulated into being sold lies. A few really happy examples to end the video. First being the Dakota Access Pipeline. When that happened, there was thousands of people who flocked to go support. And there was hundreds of thousands of dollars that people sent to support. There was such a massive amount of support. NGOs flocked to go there and soak up that support because the big focus of NGOs is to directly quell revolutionary support and to convert it to liberalism. So one weakness of anarchism and small community-based things is that there is no accountability and that it is very, very broad grounds for people to solicit donations and go do so-called the work. And another really good example is in occupied Korea. The nurses and doctors are going on strike, and that escalation happened before. There's been decades of escalation of labor, and as of now, the president has been impeached, and it wasn't by any decentralized bullshit. It was through organized labor and mass movements. So this was done by 1.1 million members of the biggest union in Korea, in occupied Korea. The president attempted to use martial law and failed. 1.1 million people shutting down the country is vastly too big for martial law to work. Because when you have a mass movement, you have people who are able to have demands, people who are able to negotiate, people who are able to make decisive action and call the shots of when to strike, when to cede, when to negotiate, and when to continue striking and taking action.